Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this video I want to revise and expand upon some older work and then link up, so there'll be links in the description to connected series. So not just the focus will be the Great Pyramid, but also looking at the larger complex. Is there a connections between, are they individual features, or is the Giza pyramids and others such down south as Abu Sir, do they contain a series of reflected information? So the video I posted yesterday, again we're looking at the Royal Cubit, how it applies inside the pyramid, also the outside proportions, but just to get, what was the Egyptian cubit, how do we know this, where did it come from in terms of cubit rods, and just to confirm that information. So a cubit is effectively pi over 6 meters. The difference is microns from either side. So if you want to know what Egyptian cubit is, pi divided by 6 meters. So looking at the pyramid of Khufu, Cheops, or the Great Pyramid, and also how it relates to the satellite pyramids there on the side. There's the Great Pyramid as it is now. Now this will also apply to the stretching the cord ceremony, very important ancient Egyptian ceremony where the pharaoh with Seshat, the goddess of weights, measures, survey, architecture, so forth, she's a female counterpart of Thoth. Before you build a temple, you need to survey it, and to keep it on track you need to have a good foundation and a good survey point, and the stretching the cord ceremony has a lot to do with that. I'll link in the description. I recently made a compilation of an older Seshat series, goddess of scribes, keeper of records. She was also, again, the goddess, weights, measures, mathematics, writing, all the sciences really. And now Imhotep was a famous architect said to have invented the pyramid, and he's also he was later equated with Thoth, and he was also a high priest at Heliopolis. High priest of Heliopolis was the chief of the observers, essentially the astronomer royal, and Heliopolis being the primary sanctuary of Seshat, goddess, wisdom, knowledge, sciences, that type of thing. And that link to, I compiled the earlier series just 3-4 weeks ago, so that will be linked in the description as well. But I want to look at the John Romer and what he's proposing in regards to the surveying of the pyramid, and how a relatively simple, efficient system was used to keep the pyramid on track. So as you're building up, how did they survey it? In the Seshat and Heliopolis series I'll go into that. The symbol of Seshat essentially being a grommer, a primitive but very effective survey tool because it relies on plumb lines, and plumb lines will remain true. I'll link this video in the description, uncovering the ancient secrets of the Great Pyramids from 60 Minutes Australia. So we have the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, 440 Egyptian cubits, slight variation on each side. In the last video I went into the variations, and again this will be a concept I'll touch on later, but the imperfections of the pyramid actually carry information, because the difference between the southern side, which is the longest, and the northern side, which is the shortest, it's stretching it to say it was a construction error, because surveying, stretching the cord, it's very important to get your temple aligned. When you begin, you get your foundations right. You don't begin with when you survey, you're building a house, you put down your slab, you get that right, and then everything else builds up on top of it. But so it's 280 Egyptian raw cubits high and 440 Egyptian raw cubits, give or take these little fractions on either side. But in most cities of the world, that's between 40 to 50 stories high, depending on how high each level of the building is. So this would dominate in most cities of the world. It's so how to keep this accurate. So like when they build a skyscraper now, you've got to survey it, you've got to get it right, you've got to keep it going. Otherwise it'll start to twist, or it will bend, or it just won't be right, and that's very bad. Just looks bad, but in terms of construction it's going to cause problems, big problems. So how did the ancient architects, builders of the pyramids, how did they, you begin with a schematic, a design, how did they turn this blueprint and keep it on track? And so there we have the three famous pyramids, Menkaure, Khafre and Khufu. And this would have been an issue for all of them. So even the smallest Menkaure is still, it's no small, it would still be a 20, 25 story building, and that's the smallest of the Giza pyramids. These are not, you got to do it right. So there we see like an aerial view. So what it looks like now, back in the day, it had the casing stones, would have looked something more like that. Here's another aerial view. And what John Romer is proposing is that the blueprint of the Great Pyramid was laid out right next to it on the eastern side. We can find evidence that the plan of a pyramid was placed in there. And also worth noting, so there we'd see the pyramid, and we find the center of a Great Pyramid, the center of a Menkaure pyramid, and that plan fits again. So the larger larger complex was part of a coherent plan rather than just ad hoc. And so we see how the Great Pyramid fits in there. And what's also, so the Great Pyramid, 208 Egyptian royal cubits high by 440. So let's just say that was a mistake, a coincidence. Well, it just so happens, so I'm just using the right angle triangle. The full base would be 2,200 ERC across there, so I'm just using the right angle triangle. But it just so happens that if you multiply the Great Pyramid by 5, you get this dimension. So just by accident they aligned Great Pyramid and Menkaure Pyramid, and they just so happen to have the centers of each at 5 times the size of the Great Pyramid. Coincidence? I think not. But we see the blueprint of the Great Pyramid there, and also the blueprint just fits again very nicely. Now we'll come back to it later, but now for instance it also crosses over. Now that illustration in the linked series, I go and use Google Earth Pro to try and get the lines as accurate as I can with my limited resources. So this image is a little bit off, but that line, that angle, does pass right over what I'm referring to as the 0 point, which I think is one of the most important survey markers for the larger Giza complex, which is the door from the Khafre Valley Temple, which leads to the causeway. So it's not, again, it has architectural design significance on its own, and in the measurement and angle sense it just fits in so well. We come back to John Romer and what he's suggesting. So he's here on the east side of the Great Pyramid, and what are they looking at? Well, there are these potholes across the area. Well, not even a pothole there, holes in the ground. And he points to a series of these across the eastern side of the Great Pyramid. And he's suggesting that very much like a survey marker that you'll probably notice, in your street or on the side of buildings, where the surveyors take these key points, that's what's happening, that these holes were survey points for instruments, or instruments as simple as a stick and a shadow could be placed in there, and then measurements could be taken. And not only was the plan laid out, but it was laid out at 1:1 to keep the angle very accurate. And so there's a screenshot from the video, what he's showing there. So we have this grid plan, and we have those potholes are marked along the way. So he also points out potholes, let's just call they're survey markers. They're not potholes. But also notes that in this grid plan, there's a 20, 40, and 60 Egyptian royal cubit between these potholes and this grid hole. That's a very important feature. Very interesting. Now for a moment, let's look at a couple aerial photos. So this is a more recent satellite photo, and this is a famous photo of the taken on the solstice, where the shadow splits the Great Pyramid. Now I must add again, and I mentioned it before, I have not found any other photos, videos of this time. Pyramid of Kukulkan in Mexico has that serpent snake which appears on the equinox. So the solstice equinox, and people are it reappears, but this, surely people have been there, but so this historic photo, I don't know what's going on, but I haven't seen anyone, I'm sure crowds would be there every year to celebrate this and let's take photos, let's take videos of it. There hasn't been any sort of change, demolition, reconstruction, renovation, earthquakes, or anything to really explain that. But anyway, my point is that we can see shadows here. So on that day, on the equinox, we see on the solstice, or was it well, we have this shadow appearing now. Geez, I forget the day. But the point, and here we see again, we can see the shadows being cast. Now I'd like to add that back to John Romer's plan, that the architects, the builders, could have also, in conjunction with what John Romer's proposing, have used these shadows as a way to build and survey the pyramid as they're going up. So now it's a point because it's finished pyramid as it's going to a point. Back in time, it would have had a flattened top as they're building up. Just to highlight the shadows. Now, on the equinox, the shadow would be much more like, because the sun's directly overhead, and throughout the day, I'm again spitballing. I'm not, but just as a concept, that certain days of the year would have been very important opportunities to conduct this surveying, so that the shadow of a pyramid would have been, even as it's being built up and it was a flattened top, that the shadows would even correspond with these lines, and that would be a possible way to maintain and build and test the pyramid as it's going up. So I referenced the Heliopolis and the Seshat series, but Seshat was the goddess of architecture, the stretching the cord ceremony, and even her symbol has these, many suggest that because of her connection to survey, that this was actually a survey tool, and through the use of this tool, so for instance, if you superimpose the old, what we see there is very similar to the shadows that would be cast on winter solstice, equinox, and summer solstice, and done very effectively, very accurately, but very simply with a stick, a gnomon. And this is just like a plumb line or a water level. These very simple tools will give very good results. And so this concept is one that, again, across time, across the cultures, where you find, again, just even my mum taught, when she grew up in the farm, they would put a stick in the ground, they would mark it early in the morning, and when the stick reached a certain point, that was lunchtime. So it's a very simple but very effective tool, and with a little bit more knowledge and sophistication applied to it, it is a very accurate survey tool. So for instance, with that gnomon, you can get north, south, and get your cardinal points, and then you can also trace the line of a shadow path. Now that's important because as the sun's moving during the day, okay, it's going to be constantly moving, but with a very not too complicated marking out at certain points, you would also be able, now you wouldn't need to survey every minute or every hour of every day, but even even not on the equinox, but in different parts of the year, if you understood the shadow's path and its movement, you could also conduct surveying and get in conjunction with other methods. But the more methods and more measurements you take, the better it's going to be. And so with all of these factors together, you can do very accurate surveys. Now that also relates, we'll come back to this in a moment, because of the related connections of the Unlocking the Pyramid series, where I was suggesting that there is a survey point here at the doorway that connects the Caffrey Valley Temple to the causeway itself, and how this marks out the solstice, equinox, summer solstice, equinox, and equinoxes, and the winter solstice as well. And by that I mean, for instance, on that winter solstice, it touches the very corner of Kent Coway's pyramid. So we're also including the fourth of the major structures The Caffrey Valley, the Caffrey Causeway is 14 degrees from true west, and this 14 degrees division is a very important feature from the solstices through the equinoxes as well. Now, worth noting that go back now, the causeway from the Great Pyramid itself also shares this 14-degree angle, which would be another angle to look at surveying and those connections. So with John Romer, now I mentioned the 20 cubits, 40 cubits and 60 cubits distances, which he also found in there. In the last video we were examining the average, what the average was of each side of the Great Pyramid, using that to derive a cubit measurement and then finding that on the inside. Now, for instance, the Grand Gallery, the step is 1 cubit high, 1 cubit wide with a 2 Egyptian raw cubit gap in between. So also, for instance, so that's 4 Egyptian cubits from wall to wall. That's at ground level, man level. Idealized human is 4 cubits. Now there's a lot to go into that, but also how it's 1 cubit high of a step, therefore 2 cubits wide and 1 cubit high. So 4 cubits or 2 is a nice thing because it's just times 10, 2 times 10, 20, 4 times 10 is 40. And you'll also, in Egyptian, for instance, the cord, in the stretching the cord ceremony, an Egyptian cord was 100 Egyptian cubits. They were using 10 as the way they devised and divided things up. Now, they had sort of the for instance, an Egyptian royal cubit is 28 fingers or 7 palm, but the cord and other units of measure that the Egyptians were using were in tens and hundreds as well. So this was a type of counting that they were using too. So the Grand Gallery, 4 Egyptian royal cubits wide, and King's Chamber. Now along the longer side, that's 20 Egyptian royal cubits wide, so again 20 cubits, but the perimeter is 60 cubits. Now I'm mentioning that because this is an important number that will apply to the larger Giza plan as well. So the perimeter is 60 Egyptian royal cubits. Now if we take the height of a pyramid and the half base, 280 minus 220 gives us 60 Egyptian royal cubits. And I will come, because I want to revise the where you can find pi inside of a Great Pyramid. It's not just the external proportions, you can find it multiple in measurement, in proportion, inside and out of a Great Pyramid. But so height minus the half base is 60 Egyptian royal cubits. The pyramid is a 3-dimensional object, so the most you'll ever see standing at ground level is 2 sides. So 440 base, but the most you'll ever see is 880 Egyptian royal cubits. 880, 280 high, which gives you a 22/7 ratio. It's effectively pi, but I'll go with more. But 880 minus the height gives us 600 Egyptian royal cubits, so 10 times 60. So height minus half base, 60 Egyptian royal cubits, which is the same as the perimeter of the King's Chamber, while the maximum visible base length minus the height gives us 600 Egyptian royal cubits, and 60 Egyptian royal cubits is pi times 10 meters. 600 Egyptian royal cubits is pi times 100 meters. Now, also worth noting is, again, because it's not just the pyramid, it's also the larger plan. So we come back to these solstice alignments. Now, on the winter solstice, the distance from the 0 point to where the sun would set touching the northwest corner of Kent Coway's pyramid/tomb is precisely 600 Egyptian royal cubits again. And also worth noting that the Great Pyramid is 280 Egyptian royal cubits high. The height of the Caffrey Pyramid is 240 Egyptian royal cubits high, which is a difference of 6 Egyptian royal cubits. 6 Egyptian royal cubits is pi meters. So we'll come back to that. Now even down south, pyramids such as Neferakare, Teti I, Merenenre, Pepi I and Pepi II all share the same proportions, which is the same as the Khafre pyramid, which gives us 3, 4, 5 triangles, but they all have the same base length of 150 Egyptian raw cubits, or 100 Egyptian raw, that's a chord, 100 Egyptian raw cubits, but the point is that this standardized base on a standardized proportion is 600 Egyptian raw cubits perimeter, which is pi times 100 meters. So again, 600 Egyptian raw cubits, 66, all coming together. Now, add those. Firstly, they're at nice harmonic, right? So 1 to 2 and 1 to 3. But add them together, you get 120 Egyptian raw cubits. Now we mentioned Kawai's from the 0 point to where the setting sun on the winter solstice would touch that corner, 600 Egyptian raw cubits, while from the 0 point, which leads directly out along the Khafre Valley Causeway, it's 1200 Egyptian raw cubits from there to where it touches the Khafre pyramid, twice of that distance, and again 120. So each of these units you can break them down, and there's a lot more, but it's either times 1, times 10, times 100, or times 1,000. So now this is new discovery on the east side of the Great Pyramid. Not too long ago, November 2nd, 2020, posted by the Great Pyramid AIP channel. Now on the eastern side as well, where that John Romer shows that those survey markers and the grid pattern points to, Larry Pahl, and he looked at, he found this, and he noticed also another line, so where this line is pointing to, but it's as he points out in the video, and it's very difficult. It's essentially illegal to take even measurements. So to even go there with a tape measure can get you in trouble. And he had issues with this type of thing so he was unable to measure it precisely, not because he didn't want to, but because you're not allowed to. But he could not be exact, so it's a little bit either way, but it's very close to 28 by 22 inches, or an inch off either way. Now, that's important. This difference could also point to the Khafre Valley pyramid, which would make a 3, 4, 5 triangle. So I've put a question mark here, but I think it's interesting because it's very close to 28 to 22 inches. Precise measures would be needed to be done, but again, it's not allowed. But that creates a 14 to 11 ratio, and 100, so we go to this larger plan, so we're from the center of a Great Pyramid to center of a Menkaure, creates a pyramid design of times 5 of a not just the angle, but again it's times 5 of the size, and that's a 14 to 11 ratio, this right angle triangle. So that possibly could fit in there, and so tip of a hat to Larry for pointing that out. And at 0 point again, from where you get the 600 Egyptian raw cubits, and also the 1200 to the Khafre Valley Temple, but that passes over the Greater Pyramid plan. So the 0 point also hits that point as well. I'll post a link in a description to a series, Unlocking the Pyramids, where I go through more of this in detail, or link to articles and studies that have been done, and as well as look at places such as Thebes and Abydos. So it's not just the pyramids, the Giza pyramids, not just the ones to the south that we just saw, which are linked by measurement and proportion, but also Thebes, so like Karnak, Temple of Karnak, Temple of Luxor, and Ramesseum, and all those temples there, and even the Osirion and Seti I have these connections. But is there a larger plan? There's so much, correlation is not causation, but the more correlation you get, it's much harder to say, well, there's not something here, and it's not just the coincidence of angles and coincidence of measures and size, which are found repeated again, not just on the Giza Plateau, but further down. And then we get to the metrological connections as well, such as the way that the Egyptian raw cubit just so beautifully ties in with other units of measure at really important points as well. So not only, even if, well, let's just say it was accidental, I think but the Great Pyramid is a textbook in stone into math, measurement, geometry. The other three Giza pyramids as well, so 2x3 Khafre pyramid, which gives you 3, 4, 5 triangles, which is also a Fibonacci, but the Menkaure pyramid is a 5x8 proportion, which is a Fibonacci proportion, and even the way that those measurements and that relate to other pyramids, the Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, as well as those others a little bit further down south around Abu Sir in that particular area. So we have not just the one being a textbook in stone, the whole site has it. So even if it is, let's say, okay, I don't want to accept it, it's all just coincidence. Well, it's still there. If it was by it's a symphony of coincidences where you can just find this really cool, interesting math, archaeoastronomy, and yeah, the Greeks come later and did it knowingly, but the Egyptians just happened to drop it there just by, again, coincidence. So it's sort of like, if you say it's coincidence, then it's got to be somehow is it in our DNA? Like, anyway, let's not rant about that now. Back to the John Romer plan, because there is another element in regards to this which is very coincidental and interesting. So again, like on the east side, he's pointing out that these survey points have a 1-to-1 ratio of a Great Pyramid, which will be very helpful, if not essential, in the design, the building of it. It's one thing to draw it, it's another thing to keep it accurate and stop it twisting and turning, keeping the angles on line. And he again, this grid plan. Now he's also, well, the grid is slightly offset, and what he's suggesting is, so that's the location of one of those. There we see the causeway of the Great Pyramid, 14 degrees. Now here we have the schematic, the interior of the Great Pyramid, and now that's the side view, but now we have the top view where you can see the shafts, the passages in there, and you'll note that they're not on the center line. So the center line is there, but the main passages and tunnels, the Grand Gallery, are all off center. So just there highlighted in black, and again that's the center line there. And this is what, again, Larry Pahl from the Great Pyramid AIP channel pointed out. And so there's someone sneaky snuck up on top. We see the trial passages and the three satellite pyramids. That's them there, 1, 2, 3. Trial passages is a lot to be, different ideas, but it's often said that the trial passages are almost like a prototype of the internals of the Great Pyramid. And again, it's an issue to get the most accurate, precise plan of the internals of a Great Pyramid, but the trial passages don't precisely match up with any of them. They're very close. This could be, well, very issues of getting everyone sort of seems to have a slightly different angle on the descending passage or the ascending passages up into the Grand Gallery, but at the very least the trial passages are very close and they don't have this shaft coming down, so but worth noting. Okay, so there we see the blue line, which is the passages of the Great Pyramid, while the red line is the center of the Great Pyramid, And over here again on the eastern side, we have the trial passages. Again, secret hidden in the trial passages of the Great Pyramid, the Silent Sage by the Great Pyramid AIP channel, links in the description. Because he was the one who pointed this out. So we have the trial passages there closely reflecting the internals of the Great Pyramid, but we also have the 3 satellite pyramids. Now what Larry's noted was that the axis, the center of the 3 satellite pyramids, is slightly offset from the north-south line of the trial passages. So there we see them marked out now. All I'm going to do is just shift this pyramid plan over, and those lines match. So that offset of the trial passages to the axis of the north-south axis of the satellite pyramids matches up very, very nicely. And this is an important feature. So red line and the blue, so there we see that offset. Now that's an important feature, because as another feature is that John Romer's pointed out. So there I've overlaid the image, but so we'll see them. So John Romer noted that there's an offset there. I'll come back to that in a moment. But even if you put the internals of a Great Pyramid, there is a correspondence there as well. But also the cut view as well, where we have the center line, and there we have the offset. So the center line cutting down the middle of the Great Pyramid, and this is a pyramid as viewed from the west. So that's heading north. But that center line, again, to get super accurate diagram of the Great Pyramid, but it is very close. So it's marking the outside of the wall of the King's Chamber, and also marking the subterranean chamber. Again, just a note, this is not 100% precise. It was there are a few slight variations with different schematics on there. Some of them are clearly like way off, but using the Piazzi Smythe and the more detailed ones there, it does fit. Again, asterisk question mark there, but this offset also does match up with key features on the internals. And the John Romer plan, okay, so what John Romer pointed out was that we have this grid plan on the ground, but when overlaid on the internals of a pyramid, there are these key points where it's offset, and that in itself contains, well, this will most likely just be dismissed as a construction error, but as is so often the case in the esoteric and the hermeticists, they embedded errors in there, but the errors actually contain information and lead to a more profound understanding of these things. And so if it was just an error in the construction, that it just so happens to work so well with the trial passages. And we'll go back to, so yeah, John Romer point, the offset matches the offset of the central axis of the Great Pyramid and the Grand Gallery and the main passages, and that this also, yeah, it just ties up so nicely, and it is just one of these repeated, like for instance, the north side is 19.6 centimeters shorter than the south side, but the circumference of the Earth just happens to, so the further you go north away from the equator, or works on the south as well, of course, but this just happens to match the shortening of the equator, the shortening of the circumference of the Earth. The further you go north, the circumference is going to get smaller and smaller. It's maximum at the equator, and this trapezoidal shape, even though it looks like a square, but that would match with the Earth as well, which is another one of these key curiosities, coincidences that just so happens to be embedded in so much ancient architecture, and this theme's very important. So that's the trial passages offset from the satellite pyramids, matching the offset of the main passages of a Great Pyramid from the center, and also viewed from the side. So it's just John Romer's an Egyptologist, so this, he has a bit more credibility in that sense. But it is just one of these recurring themes, and yes, the errors contain information if you examine them, and just now, of course, there are going to be mistakes everywhere, but it's anything that doesn't fit the idealized measurements or the idealized proportion would just get, well, it's just a construction error. It's often said that the 8-sided pyramids was a construction error and that it collapsed internally at 90 degrees from one another right down the middle without impacting on the internal, the Grand Gallery and these other internal, they don't show evidence of this. But again, it's whatever doesn't fit, either it's a coincidence or it's alien techno, but follow the pattern. If it was just one thing, okay, but when we see how so many things correlate, correlation is not causation, but if several correlations keep peering up and you're not looking at it and at least considering it, then yeah, okay. So that's it for this video. It was a revision of an older one, some more information coming in there, bringing these pieces together, and especially the measurements in there, how that connects to especially pi and how qubits connect to the meter. We'll look at that in the next episode, because it just pops up so often that it's the standard. It's not the exception, it is the rule. Whether they understood it, the fact is that it's there. Whether they intentionally put it in the design, people can argue about that, but that it exists, this is beyond argument. With that, hope you enjoyed. As always, there'll be more to come.